So now we've gotten to that stage. The next stage is to start into the actual pastel. I would, if you're not sure about this at this point, you know, if we're having any doubts about shapes, continue working on this stage. Once you feel that you like where it's going, then you go into the pigment, the pastel pigment, and once you do that, you're sort of committed. So usually my first step is to always state the darks, put them down. So at this point I'm looking for the sort of the darker accents. I'm using a variety of pastels. I'm using Sennelier, Rembrandt, New Pastel, Great American, Terry Ludwig's, Holbein. I love them all. They're all wonderful tools. So again, with the shapes and the mark making, it's about creating textures. So the color choices I'm using, the reason I picked this color, it's a warm dark. I find the darks in nature tend to look better if they're painted with a warmer color. So I've chosen this sort of warm, dark, burnt sienna. So now I'm just indicating those darks. I find one of the nice things about the stream beds, and I've looked into many a stream bed, both as a painter and as a fisherman, is to see what's underneath the water. And there's, you know, and every place is different, but Rocky Mountain National Park has these wonderful, beautiful, sort of warmish colored rocks underneath the stream. So it tends to make the creeks look very warm in tone, almost a dark orange. So keeping that in mind, what I'm doing here is I'm suggesting the rock bed of the creek, the sort of dark notes. And I want to just design, again, it's about variety, not following what's there, but just kind of creating some big shapes, some little shapes. And that will give me that foundation. And as you go away from that, looking into the creek, you see less of the rocks, and then you're seeing more of the top plane of the water. So you really only need to indicate them at the extreme foreground. Now, the pines typically would have a cool cast. There's a warm and cool side to the pines. Because they're further in the distance, they tend to have a bluer cast than this warm. At this point, I've kind of worked with more warm tones. So I'm going to switch to a kind of cooler tone for those pines. And you want to mix this stage up. I mean, if you want a cool color in the background, you know, think about, do you want it to be violet or blue or, you know, a green dark? I mean, we can really vary the coloration in the paintings. Now I'm using this is a very dark blue. Let's just try that. So using the side of this pastel, I believe this is a Terry Ludwig pastel. Just using the side of it, just kind of thinking again about the textural quality of the pines. So I'm just introducing a little bit of that blue into the foreground here just to kind of tie the colors in. Maybe I'll add just a little bit of it there, but okay. So we've laid that color down. One of the things I do in the studio is as I grab a pastel out of my pastel palette here, I put it on my ledge here on the easel. This eventually will be filled with all the colors I use in the painting, and I'll just keep them there during the whole process of the painting. It's just a great way to go right back to the color that we've used. in pastel, one of the things is the idea of the tooth of the paper. If we lose that tooth, essentially we lose that ability to grab the pigment. So we want to maintain the tooth in the areas that we want to keep layering. And once we've put a certain amount of pigment that covers that grabbing quality, it's hard to go into it anymore with additional layers. So this is one way to remove the layers. Another thing I might do is take a palette knife and just scrape down. You can see the pigment kind of falling. Scrape down the, and this is something I keep a palette knife in my paint box outdoors and might use this outside, but it's also a way to kind of knock down the pigment. So there's another tool there that I've used. A stiff brush too will kind of give me some of that. See how it's knocking some of that off? And it also is a great way to like paint when you're thinking of textures. When I first started working with pastel, one of the things I admired was the ability that oil painters had to create textures with brush marks. And so I started using whatever tool I could to kind of emulate textures I saw in oil paintings. So I thought, well, try a brush, use a brush in there. And I don't know if you see it. I mean, sometimes it's really subtle, but it's enough to get a certain quality I'm after, a certain softness of edge, or usually you see it at the edges of shapes where one value meets another value. That's where you see that edge quality really kind of take place and gain importance. So now let's go in with the willows. Let's just start to introduce some of the color here. Now, willows are never the same. It's different seasons, different locations. The willows have a variety of colors. So pay attention to the willows that might exist in your own areas. They're never the same kind of color. I'm amazed. Sometimes they seem very purple, sometimes very gray. Sometimes you'll start to see evidences of the greens coming through. And this is that time of year. This is probably late March, and the greens are just wanting to start to peek through, so you'll see bits of green in there. So I'll usually introduce a little green into that as well. I'm adding that green to the water because some of this is going to be reflecting in the water. So now let's indicate some of the rocks that are underneath using the same reddish tone. And the main reason I'm using the same tone I use there is it ties the color harmony together. But it's also a color that would exist. Nature actually does a wonderful job of harmonizing color for us. All we have to do is follow what nature's doing, and we never have to worry about color harmony in our work. It's happening automatically. One of the things I like to tell people in my workshops is, I've never come to a landscape and said, yeah, that color harmony just doesn't work. I'm noticing bits of violet that was in the water, some bits of violet, so I chose to switch to this nice kind of warmish violet color, include it. A couple things it's doing is the violet will really harmonize with the oranges that are here. It will harmonize with the greens eventually that will go into the pines. So that just kind of instinctually wanted to pick up a violet color at that stage. And when that happens, outdoors I pick up a violet because it's I'm definitely wanting to, I see it in nature, I capture it, I want to grab that color as I see it exist, and just trust that instinct and not try to second guess it. And I don't, I think that comes from just doing this in the past, painting from location and seeing those colors that happen in nature. But sometimes the painting is just asking for a color. It just wants a certain color note. And you see this happen a lot. People, you'll just feel like it needs a little bit of red or purple, whatever. Trust your instinct. So what I want to indicate now is that distant mountain range. I'm going to make it look like it's further off in the distance than it actually is. So, the way to test the value is to put it next to another value, and then, you can just automatically say, is it light or dark enough? That's the question we want to ask. So I want this value to be lighter than the trees, so you see a shape, but it's got to be dark enough to indicate that it's mountain. If it's too light, it starts looking like it could be sky. And again, I think this color is based on seeing this kind of coloration in the mountains here in Colorado and using it in the past, knowing this was a color value that worked. See, that gives you that sort of nice mountain peak off in the distance. One thing I do is, over here in the trees, I just want to kind of suggest that it's there. Because sometimes you can see it kind of peeking through the tiny portions of the tree. Now, just to harmonize that color, I want to bring it around. This is the grasses that are starting to kind of peek out of the snow in the winter. They have a nice kind of red, warmish yellow ochre tone to them, and I see where I've used it a lot in some of these field sketches, so I tend to see this ochre color. So now we're just picking up. I'm just hinting at the color. I'm not really drawing it in so much as just indicating it, suggesting it. I want to save the drawing for those areas that I want to define later. Let's get some of this blue right in here. Because I think what's happening right here is you get a bit of the trees are reflecting into the water. So some of that blue color that was here is going to now reflect into the creek, and it's going to mix with that undertone. As I did that, I felt like, okay, I need to warm up the rocks in the foreground, because they're, warm colors tend to come forward and cool colors recede. So I just wanted to warm that up a bit more. That helps to make it come forward. Okay, so let me step back again and really look at the dark light design. That's again what I'm looking at. When I squint down, I've added color, but it's still relatively similar to that initial noton that we looked at earlier. Now I've gone in with a green note just to sort of indicate the greens that are in the pine. And the mark making, essentially, I'm trying to create a lot of variety, some small strokes, some larger strokes. What I'm trying to do now is indicate the sunlight side of the pines. Now this particular day was sort of one of those days where you had sort of, kind of soft clouds in the sky, so the light wasn't intensely blue. There was a subtle bit of light coming through, so I don't want to over-exaggerate the feeling of sunlight and shadow. But there was just enough of it to create sort of a soft effect. And sunlight can be achieved fairly easily with contrast, light, dark, but also with warm and cool. It's a constant analyzing of the shape and color and, variety. And so so here I'm using this Teligan just to suggest some of the shapes in the water. But at the end of the day, it's just problem solving. We're trying to create variety and interest. It's not duplicating, but it's working with ideas that exist in nature, but then trying to create some sort of painting effect with them. There's just enough sunlight coming through that it's creating a little bit of cast shadow on these snowbanks. This always shocks people at this stage because the blue seems kind of intense. And I may have to gray it down, but we got to start with something. But I'm seeing there's a little bit of shadow here. Probably a little more green in this. Let's go in with sort of a viridian type green to knock that down. The nice thing about the viridian green is it will relate to the greens that are in the pine trees. I want the painting to grow as a whole. So I want to keep my eye moving around, move the drawing implement around, move it to different areas so I kind of keep fresh certain areas of the painting